Hunting or Bust, The Journey Onward by Master Atlan, Chapter 4, The Players Make Their Moves. Sasuke sprinted through the forest and maneuvered around the trees while making sure his senses were at the ready for anything and everything, although now that he thought about it, there really wasn't any reason to try and be aware of his surroundings, because anything and everything that would want to hurt him was currently chasing him by his metaphorical tail. And Sasuke looked back to see a group of Beowulfs, Barbertusk, and Orsai for good measure charging after him, while Sasuke dashed through the woods with the roaring and gurgling of several kinds of creatures of pure destruction chasing behind him. He couldn't help but glare and curse his luck. It wasn't his fault that he was finding some fun in soaring over the trees, right? How many times do you get flung off a cliff with a catapult? And when you have the skills to land in a situation like that without sustaining injury, it isn't uncommon to try and find some joy in doing so. But, of course, he had to jump a little further than where he was supposed to land, and of course, he landed directly in the middle of a grim nest. Good lord, Naruto would be having a freaking field day if he knew he was in this situation, and if his brother knew he was being careless. Oh, who was he kidding? If his brother was facing him right now, then he would have a lot more to say than just how disappointed he was that Sasuke was being careless. And just as Sasuke's thoughts started to drift, an Ursa popped out from behind a tree and raised his claws to slash at him, but it swiped at thin air as Sasuke ducked under the massive claw before he flipped and placed his feet on the creature's chest. He pulled the trigger and the shotgun blast blew the Grimm's head off while launching him at the charging stampede of monsters. He pulled his sword out in a quick draw and sliced the Beowulf in half before he skidded across the ground. The Grimm all turned around before charging again at the sword-wielding teenager. He spun the blade in his hand before parrying several strikes from Beowulf that took the first charge. Sasuke blocked the monster's attack before spinning on his feet, removing his scythe while cocking it, and aiming it against the Grimm's head before pulling the trigger. As the Beowulf fell back, and Ursa came charging forward to attack the Uchiha boy, but he blocked the strike with his sword. He immediately pushed the blade back before quickly swiping at the large Grimm's body several times with his blade. It met some resistance from the Grimm's natural hard body and bone-like armor, but each of Sasuke's strikes staggered at the larger creature before he kicked it in the chest and sent it flying back through a tree. Two Borpatus came spinning at him while the raven-haired boy jumped over them for safety. They turned around before speeding towards him again. Sasuke gripped his sheath and held both arms out as his sword and sheath slipped in between the Grimm's tusk. He pushed down and sent the creature flying through the trees while they wailed in shock. He ducked under Beowulf's swipe and swept his legs out from under it before kicking it into a bush. He smacked another Beowulf in the face with his sheath before flipping his sword in hand and stabbing behind him into a charging Barbertusk. He looked up to see a pouncing Ursa come down at him, so he rolled out of the way as the monster crashed into the ground. Sasuke rolled before sitting back up to see that the entire collection of Grimm were covering him on all sides, letting out low growls as they advanced towards him. The young Uchiha narrowed his eyes before flipping his sword in hand and sliding it back into its sheath. He reached down and cocked the top forend before gripping the handle of his sword. The young man closed his eyes and slowed his breathing while keeping his focus on the Grimm and their movements. The surrounding Grimm all pounced forward at the crouching boy with the intent to kill. Bang! With the extra power from fire involvement reflection out of his scythe, he drew his sword with a quick slash and cut everything around him several times. The Grimm all froze in place while Sasuke's arms outstretched with his sword in hand. The Grimm all blew apart after getting sliced into pieces, and the tree around them fell apart from the power of Sasuke's fast draw. As his enemy fell to chunks, Sasuke spun his sword in his hand before sheathing it again and standing up. He looked around at all the sliced apart bark bushes and Grimm parts before deciding to get back to the exam at hand. Naruto stopped and looked back to see the Ursa he had kicked earlier had recovered after his strike and was making its way back to him. It stood up on its hind legs and prepared to fight him again. And Sasuke furrowed his eyes and lowered his stance to attack once more. Sasuke blinked in surprise as knives flew around him and littered the Grimm's entire body. There were dozens of knives pierced into the creature's body, and they had flew around him so expertly that there was an outline of his body where the Ursa wasn't skewered. It let out one last growl before falling forward in a dead heap. Sasuke just stood there in surprise as his last foe was swiftly and utterly defeated by several dozen different types of knives that flew out of nowhere. Hey, that was pretty cool, right? Sasuke turned around to see a young lady with her hair down up in buns. She smiled and flipped her wrist so a knife appeared between her fingers. I'm sorry, I didn't come out sooner, but it looked like you were handling everything pretty well by yourself. I think that thing you did with your sword was way cooler, but I guess I just wanted to help in the end. You don't have a partner yet, right? She grinned. I'm Tenten. Looks like we're gonna be working together for a while. Sasuke just looked at the bun-haired girl for a moment in silence. He looked back at the Ursa with the multitude of knives in its body before looking back at her in confusion. Where do you hide all those knives? Tenten smirked. Trade secret. Hunting. Ruby was silently following behind the older, white-haired girl that silently marched her way through the forest. After they had met up a while back, Weiss had dragged her along by her hood before letting her go and just kept moving. Since then, they hadn't so much as shared a conversation together. Ruby was nervous because Weiss had a displeased, annoyed scowl spread over her face, and she looked like she would go off at any moment. To be fair, in all of the interactions she had with the Harris, she always seemed to look angry about something, but in her defense, every time they met, it usually ended in disaster. Ruby sped up so she was catching up to the rapier user before she acted lightly. Weiss, are you mad? You seem mad. Yeah, Weiss answered immediately. Yes, you're right, I am mad. Why are you mad? It shouldn't be that hard to figure out why I'm mad. But I can't think of why. Well, then that's your own fault. Ruby's expression fell and she sulked. Geez, why are girls so hard to understand? Why stopped before looking back at her strangely. She shook her head. You're a girl too. That doesn't make any sense. Ruby felt sheepish under her glare. Well, I didn't have a lot of friends, and I'm more used to straightforward girls like Yang, so... Okay, can you please just tell me what's wrong? Otherwise, nothing is ever going to be solved. Fine, if you want to know, then I'll tell you. Weiss looked at her reluctantly accepted partner. I'm upset because I don't even get a say in the matter of how much future is planned for me. I wanted a chance to prove myself, to become something worthy of the school's prestigious standard, and become a great huntress. But now, I don't think I'll be able to reach that goal anymore. Weiss rubbed the bridge of her nose before continuing speaking. The reason I'm mad is because I'm with you, an immature, unreliable child that I'm going to have to drag with me for the next 4 years. Someone I can't put my full trust in. Ruby stood there silently as Weiss's words slowly started to sink in. Her expression sank and she looked down at her feet, feeling hurt by the way the white-haired girl was so certain she wasn't able to help. The red-tipped girl steeled her features and decided she was going to let those assumptions define her. Wasn't going to let those assumptions define her. I won't be a burden. Weiss looked back up. Excuse me. In an instant, Ruby appeared in front of Weiss in a burst of speed, shocking the girl off balance. I promise I won't be a burden to you, Weiss. I can help these next 4 years. There will be awesomeness everywhere. Weiss stumbled back. How did you... Believe me, Weiss, I can take care of myself. I'm quick. I can fight. Plus, Ruby took the large red attachment of her back and extended it into her massive crescent rose. No one will ever think about messing with us while I've got this baby. Weiss jumped back in fright at the sight of the massive, deadly weapon in her hands. Due to their short history, where very bad things happened when Ruby actively did something, Weiss was very apprehensive of her holding such a large, sharp weapon. She raised her hands. Okay, that is very impressive. Just be careful with that thing. Don't worry. Ruby started spinning the massive scythe with an expert hand while attempting to reassure the heiress. I've been studying how to use a weapon like this for a long time. I've got this in them. Bang! They both flinched when Ruby's sniper accidentally went off and fired a round into the bushes. The girl slowly looked towards the direction of the silver-eyed girl had fired and listened as birds and animals started rustling into the trees. Ruby gulped before looking in the corner of her eyes to see Weiss giving her the most annoyed and courageous look she could make. She giggled nervously. Oops, sorry. Before anything else could be said, they heard some low growls and gurgling from the bushes around them. They turned around and watched as red eyes appeared from out of the shadows. Slowly, large claws of bone and black, inky skin started reaching out before Beowulfs made themselves notice. They looked forward with all of their vicious eyes trained on the red and white girl, and among the many monsters, one of them had a smoking gun wound in its shoulder. Okay, correction, that was the most annoyed look Weiss had ever made while glaring at her. Weiss shook her head and pulled Mertenaster from her hip. She spun the dust revolver and got into a fencing stance. After this, you don't do anything else for the rest of the exam, and not another word. Ruby gripped her side. It was an accident. Ah, what did I just say? Ruby grumbled before placing her foot back and getting ready to fight. Her and Y standing beside each other while looking around at their enemies. The beowulf slowly stalked forward and prepared to attack. Ruby pulled her slide and cocked her gun before firing forward and launching herself backwards. She spun through the air with her scythe outstretched as she knocked several monsters back before embedding her massive weapon into the ground to stop. Weiss followed after her partner's initial strike and spun on her feet before a glyph appeared under her and she thrust forward. She shot off with amazing speed and struck the center of a Grimm's chest, blowing it backwards into the rest of the group. She spun around and swung her rapier with a swift yet staggering force. Ruby jumped on the back of her weapon and dislodged it from the ground before spinning it in her hands and slicing off several Beowulf's claws. She twirled it around like a weightless stick before stopping it in one direction and firing off the sniper rifle, blowing off one of the Grimm's heads without any trouble. Weiss swung her blade out before bringing it back to her shoulder and spinning the revolver to the white dust chamber. Her blade glowed with white before she swung her sword, and the glyph appeared in the air, creating several icicles and shooting them in every direction. The icicles impacted against several Beowulfs and killed them instantly. While Weiss continued to swing her rapier and create different elemental attacks, Ruby charged forward and swung her scythe. Crescent rows cut through the side of the monsters as their swipes bounced off her weapon. She leaned back as one Beowulf swung at her face before the back of her scythe landed on his shoulder and she pulled the trigger. Bang! Her scythe sliced through the Grimm's chest, and she swung through behind her to decapitate another one lurking behind her. She spun it in her hand and held it behind her while looking around at the remaining Beowulfs, smirking confidently at her show of skill. These guys stood no chance. She dashed forward. Ruby, stop! She looked up to see a blast of fire coming at her from Weiss's position, and she panicked. Ruby stumbled a little and stopped just before the blast hit her, but was still knocked over by the explosion. She tumbled on the ground and rubbed her head before looking up at her partner in confusion. What are you doing? You're running all over the field. I can't predict where you are. Weiss's eyes widened and she pointed behind her. Watch out! Ruby looked behind her to see a Beowulf raising its arm to attack her. It brought its claw down before she could move and she prepared to counter. Two short blades flew out of the air and pierced the Grimm, one in the forehead and the other in its sternum. An orange and blue blur jumped out of the bushes and spun through the air before landing in a crouch in front of the hooded girl, pulling another two blades off from his back and throwing them at the creatures surrounding them. Naruto stood up and looked down at Ruby before offering his hand. Glad to see you're still causing trouble. She looked up at him before smiling, taking his hand before standing back up. Another group of Beowulfs started charging them before they were riddled with bullets and blown apart. They all looked back to see Kiba charging out of the bushes with his tonfa in hand. He emptied the magazine before two more appeared from the latches on his legs, and he switched them out. Less talking, more fighting. Ruby and Naruto nodded before the scythe-wielding girl charged forward with the extra momentum of her shooting. Naruto reached back and pulled the last 6 short swords off his back, gripping each one between his knuckles as a Beowulf jumped him. He ducked under its claw before he started stabbing up into its exposed belly several times and kicking it away. As its body flew through the air dead, two Beowulfs came charging at him from different sides. He blocked their long white claws as they scraped against the metal of his blades. They continued forward and slashed at him as sparks flew when they were parried away. Naruto spun and ducked under their attack before placing his palms against their chins. He put pressure on the hilts between his knuckles, and 3 arrows shot through both of the Grimm's heads. Ruby circled around while creating a perimeter the Beowulfs couldn't escape from, leaving a trail of rose petals behind her. She moved so fast she had become nothing more than a red blur, the sounds of slicing flesh and mechanical wiring filling the space around them. Kiba continued to spread out his arms as he shot every Grimm in his sight. One of them ducked under his bullets and charged at him before attempting to slice off his head. He blocked it with his tonfa before grabbing its arms and pushing his other face under its jaw. He lifted it up before punching down, triggering a rocket system on the back of his weapon and giving him enough force to crush its skull into the ground. And Kiba stood back up as Ruby came running into his side, retracting Crescent Rose back into its gun form and pulling the slide. And Kiba changed his tonfa back into their gun mode, and the two teenagers were shooting everywhere around them as the Grimm started to thin up. Naruto pulled on the strings wrapped around his thumb and dislodged the blades he had thrown earlier. He gave them a fair amount of length and started swinging them around as they started stabbing into the remaining Beowulfs. With a mighty pull, he swept them off the ground and sent them flying into the sky, where they spun for a moment. Weiss looked up at the flying target and changed her dust setting to yellow before swiping her sword at the target. A dozen small yellow projectiles formed from where she swung her blade before they rocketed up and destroyed the last of the Grimm. The 4 first-year students stood in the clearing as specks of dust started snowing down on them. Naruto swiped his hands back and the blades came soaring down and lodged into the dirt by his feet. He took a moment to sheath them before breathing out in relief. That was fun, but let's try not to get all the Grimm in the forest angry at us while we're taking the exam. Agreed? Ruby hunched over and relaxed her arms. It was an accident. I swear I wasn't trying to provoke them or anything. Yeah, but you always seem to get in an accident that ruins everything, Naruto pointed out while walking over to the hooded girl and his partner. He smiled. I'm glad to see you're okay. Yeah, you too. Well, this is a touching reunion and all, Kiba interrupted while securing his tonfa to his tailbone. But who are these girls? Ruby looked up at the taller, wild-looking teenager standing beside her. She brightened up and looked at Naruto before acting excitedly. Is this your partner? Yes, Ruby, this is Kiba Nozaka. He seems like a stubborn jerk, but... well, I don't know. Haven't really talked with him much yet. Kiba glared at Naruto as he just grinned at taking the shot. Kiba, this is Ruby Rose. Ruby waved at the brown-haired boy with tattoos. Nice to meet you. He just gave a small smile and waved in return. Ruby bounced on her heels. This is great. We both got our partners. Hey, Weiss, come over here. And the white-haired girl had already made her way over with an annoyed glare on her face. She glared at her partner. What were you thinking? Ruby blinked in confusion. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you were running around so frantically during the fight, Weiss said with an annoyed and distressed tone in her voice. She motioned to the battle they just finished. You were running around without any discussion or cooperation, attacking everything in sight like you're someone out of the Bruce Willis movie. Hey, I was just fighting the way I've always fought. It's worked for me so far. Well, it's a foolish and stupid way to fight. Naruto and Kiba looked between each other before taking a step back from the girl's inevitable argument. Weiss pointed at her. I almost hit you with my attack while you were fighting the Grimm. I could have killed you. Hey, you were the one who threw that thing at me in the first place. It's your fault just as much as mine. She crossed her arms with a huff. Plus, it would take a whole lot more than that to kill me. Weiss shook her head. Ugh, you are just insufferable. Whoa. Naruto stood between the two young ladies and tried to mediate the situation. Okay, let's all calm down. We need to take a deep breath before things get out of hand. Weiss looked up at the taller blonde and felt a twitch in her eyebrow. Aren't you the one who was trying to instigate the argument last night? Naruto looked towards her. Yeah, but that was for a good laugh. Now you guys are going at each other's throats in the middle of a war zone. That's never a good idea. Weiss was reluctant for a moment before she realized that as much as she wanted to reprimand the red-colored girl, this was not the time to do as such. She placed a hand on her hip before looking at the bandana-wearing student. What are you even doing here in the first place? Naruto relaxed when she noticed they probably weren't going to argue anymore. We got lost on the way to the relics and we found you guys along the way. We weren't just gonna leave you guys to fight by yourselves. Hey, they all looked over at an angered Kiba as he pointed at the blonde. We were not lost, and you know it. We were just taking a detour. Oh right, my mistake, Naruto grumbled while throwing a look back at his touchy partner. Mr. Wondernose over there was sniffing his way to Miss Goodwitch when he got sidetracked. My reliable partner, everyone. You son of a... Kiba was fuming. I got mixed up, fine, but my semblance is useful in 100 different situations. This force is full of crap. It's not my fault I got two similar scents confused with these two. Ruby tilted her head in confusion. How did you confuse scents? Because you smell like milk from head to toe. He pointed at Ruby, catching her off guard and making her squeak in fright. He then held his nose while looking at the hairs. And you? Do you bathe in a tube of perfume or something? You reek. Weiss covered herself in with a flush on her cheeks. How dare you? Kiba defended himself. Hey, you can take that any way you want, but my pharaoh saved your butts before you got hurt. We are not some helpless girls that were waiting for you to swoop in. Weiss defied with a stern edge in her voice. We didn't ask for help from you or Raghead over there. Naruto held a hand to his bandana and furrowed his brow. This was a bandana, not a rag. Ruby was quiet for a moment while looking between the heated arguers and tried to calm them down. Weiss, they still helped us. We should at least thank them. Weiss furrowed her eyes before turning with a huff. Kiba clicked his teeth before taking a few steps back with an uninterested grunt. We don't need your thanks, so don't ever bother with it. Naruto and Ruby shared a glance, feeling concerned about their partner's ill-tempered behavior in this stressful situation. Naruto gave a weak smile. We should probably keep moving to the relic site. Someone must have already made it by now. Don't want to be the last one there. Ruby nodded in agreement. Yeah, Naruto's right. We can all get there if we can work together. Why started walking off. We're going this way. Kiba stormed off in another direction. Come on, I know this is the way. Naruto and Ruby looked between the two of them, leaving in different directions. Ruby looked at her partner indignantly. Weiss, we are not trying to make a group of friends so we can all talk and have a party together. We are trying to prove to the teachers and everyone else that we are capable of handling any dangers we may face in situations like this. Weiss said while looking back with a solid, unwavering expression. So we don't have time to waste trying to make friends. Ruby shrunk down a little as Naruto tried to negotiate. Wait, hold on. We can still work together. Just Kiba, get your ass back here. Weiss continued to march her way forward before Ruby started to follow after her. She turned to her whiskered friend and smiled. We'll see you later, Naruto. Good luck with the test. Weiss and Ruby disappeared in the green, and Naruto looked back to see Kiba waiting for him to follow. He just sighed tiredly and ran his face over his hands. Why were people always so stubborn in situations when they had to prove themselves? Not like he was any better, but it was a serious question to think about. It was important that they proved they were strong in dangerous situations. But wouldn't keeping each other safe mean more in the end than anything else? Hunting. John and Piro were making their way through the thick foliage of the forest, while the sound of gunfire of many different kinds echoed through their ears. John stopped and looked at the trees as he gulped. Was that a gun? Piro stopped for a moment and listened before nodding. Yes, it must be one of the other examinees. They must have come across a Grim. She continued forward. We must hurry. Oh, wait. John hesitated for a moment. Should we, I don't know, help or something? And Piro looked back at him for a moment before looking around at the trees. She made a complicated expression. I cannot tell which direction the gunfire came from. I don't think we'll be able to find them just by trying to follow the echo. She saw John look conflicted before she tried to reassure him. John, there's no reason to be worried. Everyone here has trained for many years to reach this point. I'm sure they can all take care of themselves. John looked back for a moment and nodded. Yeah, I guess you're right. He took a few steps forward before scratching the back of his head. I hope the others are safe. She looked back at him and seemed interested in his worry. Are there some friends of yours taking this exam as well? Yeah, well, I call them friends, but I kinda only met them yesterday. But you're worried about them? Of course, John responded like it was the most natural thing to say. If they needed help, then I would do whatever I could to help. John stood valiant for a moment before slumping his shoulders. Although, I really don't know how much use that'd actually be, but still. John stopped mulling over what he'd do in a situation like that and looked up to see Pira's shoulders shake with her giggle. She turned around and smiled at him. That is a very admirable decision, John, and I'm sure your friends would appreciate having you watch out for them like that. John chuckled. Yeah, I bet they'd appreciate it more if I had someone like you by my side to help. I'm sure if you just throw that super spear-like thing around a little, you could scare just about anything off. Pyrrha smiled but had a mixed look in her eyes hearing him say that. She shook her head. There's a stark difference between being strong and being invincible. I might be able to hold out against a strong opponent for some time, but I would not want to face it alone. Anyone would prefer having help than to just be alone. John looked at Pyrrha's back as she continued moving through the forest before he spoke up. Well, I can help you if you're ever in trouble. She looked back at him before he shrugged his shoulders. I mean, I probably won't be any more help than if you just handled it alone, but I promise I'll be by your side if you need me, for as much of a meat shield as I can be. Pyrrha looked at him in surprise before a delighted smile grew across her face. Thank you, John. It means a lot to know I have you watching my back. John smiled reassuringly as they continued forward. Pyrrha moved a branch out of her way. But you shouldn't speak so poorly about yourself. I'm sure you would be a great partner to have in a fight. He scoffed. Yeah, just as useful in a fight as... The branch Pyrrha was pushing back snapped forward and struck John directly in the face. The red-haired warrior looked back and covered her mouth. Oh no, I'm sorry, John. I'm so sorry. No, I'm all right. He was covering the lower part of his face, and his left eye was starting to water. Just got off guard. And Pyrrha knelt beside him. Here, let me see. She gently held his wrist and lowered it from his face. It shouldn't be too... Oh. What? Is something wrong? John was still unnerved by Pyrrha's blank and horrified look. She was staring at where a small twig was lodged itself between his cheek and just below his eye. She paled a little before she made an uncertain but calming smile for the quirky blonde. It's all right, John. Just close your eyes and take a deep breath. Okay. John closed his eyes while Pyrrha gently placed a hand against his face. Why do I need to close my yank? Didn't it hurt? John lamely whimpered out while some tears started forming in his side of his eyes. Pyrrha laughed awkwardly while looking at the slightly bloodied twig in her hand. She tossed it to the side before moving closer to John. Let me take another look. He was hesitant for a moment, but he trusted that Pyrrha would know how to help him. He lowered his hand to reveal a small but bloody gash between his eye and cheek. She examined it for a moment before sighing in relief. I know it might seem careless, but I think it must have felt worse than it actually was. He wiped the individual tear forming in his eye and chuckled. Well, I guess there are worse things than having a stick in your face. Still hurt though. Pyrrha apologized. I'm sorry. It's okay. It wasn't your fault. It was the trees, he joked before standing back up and rubbed just underneath the wound. Can't wait to explain this when we get back. Pyrrha had a small smile on her face while listening to the scraggly blonde joke about his injury. She examined the wound she blamed herself for. I should have warned you about the branch. At least you could have activated your aura and lessened the blow. John raised an eyebrow. My what? Your aura? What? John, you know what aura is, right? John realized he might have made a mistake and tried to cover for himself. Of course I do. Yeah, totally. That aura thing, I got it. I just didn't remember because I'm still a little stunned by the branch thing. Pyrrha saw his efforts to try and cover his lack of knowledge at the subject and decided to not pry. She looked at him. Aura is our life force, John. Our very soul that manifests itself to protect us, to guide us, to shelter us from the fear, the unnecessity, and the darkness in the world. As long as you have a soul, you have aura to guide you. And with proper practice, her body slowly started to glow a faint red light, and John was surprised at the sight. It can become as protective and sturdy as any shield. John was stunned at the sight of the illuminated light. He blinked, and everything has aura. No, not everything. Pyrrha looked off for a moment. People and animals can manifest their life force, but the creatures of Grimm cannot. She started walking around while reciting everything she had been taught on the matter. They lack a soul to begin with. There are only the manufactions of hatred and darkness. We fight them because we must understand that while we all have darkness within us, we are still the light that protects this world. When you can understand that, you can truly begin to make strides in becoming something more. John mulled over what she said as she saw him in deep thought. She walked up to him and looked into his eyes. Close your eyes. John blinked. Oh no, I don't have another twig in my face, do I? She shook her head. No, but if you want to become a huntsman, then you will need to find the light within you. John was confused for a moment before he nodded and closed his eyes. Pyrrha placed her hand on his cheeks and closed her eyes. It is in passing that we achieve immortality. Through this, we become a paragon of virtue and glory to rise above all. Infinite in distance and unbound by death, I release your soul, and by my shoulder protect thee. Pyrrha's body glowed brightly for a split second before her light faded and a wide light illuminated from John's body in its place. She stumbled and John opened his eyes in time to grab her arms and keep her standing. Pyrrha! Pyrrha felt a warmth spread along her arms and blinked her eyes back into focus to see John's body glowing white. She shook her head and reassured her partner. It's all right, John. I was just winded from unlocking your aura. I was expecting a small outburst before it settled, but you have quite a lot for just one person. John was surprised. Really? Yes, she smiled and pointed at his face. And it's working in your favor. John touched underneath his eye and couldn't feel the wound that once rested there. He laughed. How'd that happen? It's one of the perks of having aura. While you can use it to protect you, it can also heal minor wounds and injuries. Sometimes only temporary, but it is still an asset to have in battle. Pyrrha smiled at John's cheerful expression while looking over his glowing form. And now that you've unlocked your aura, it won't be long before you can find your semblance. John looked up from his glowing arms. My what? Semblance, John. A unique ability every person has that is a manifestation of your inner power. Everyone that has aura finds that not long after they are capable of using a power unlike most others. John was overwhelmed by her explanation and watched as the light around his body faded. He looked over his hands. I wonder if this is the same thing Naruto did yesterday with his palm. Pyrrha tilted her head. What do you mean? Well, one of the guys I met yesterday, Naruto, he showed me the same kind of healing thing with a cut he made on his hand. John then gestured to his whole body, but he didn't do the whole glowing thing I did. Would that be his semblance or something? Pyrrha cupped her chin and thought. I haven't met anyone that had regeneration as their semblance before. If it is a more advanced form than what aura can do by itself, then it is certainly possible. Well, whatever. John shrugged his shoulders and continued the path. I'm sure his semblance thing will help him in the fight. Come on, we still got a relic to find, right? And Pyrrha watched John continue forward with a renewed joy in his step. She smiled and giggled to herself as he headed through the foliage. He only just discovered what aura and semblances are, and he seemed a little scatterbrained, but John trusted and cared about people wholeheartedly. He was kinder and more aware than he portrayed himself to be at first glance. John fell over on the ground before raising a hand. It's okay. I got caught in a bush, but it's cool. Pyrrha laughed to herself before going over to help her friend out. Hunting. That's the last of the teams, sir. All the students have now been paired off with each other. Glinda spoke along while informing the headmaster of Beacon Academy the current status of their first years. She furrowed her eyes. Although I don't have much faith in some of these pairings, conflicting personalities, different viewpoints and skills, I'm worried this might not have been the best choice of action to make up teams. Weathering through any situation and being able to look out not only for yourselves but those who you walk alongside. This is what our test best exemplifies, Glinda. Osmond looked over his shoulder. They may seem rough at the moment, but they will come to show themselves when the time is right. Glinda looked down at her scroll and thought before looking back at Osmond's back. Sir, I have some reservations about the applicants you accept this year. Osmond didn't turn around, but did speak up. Oh, why do you say that? Glinda started rolling over her touch screen. Well, you accepted Miss Rose 2 years ahead of her determined graduation time. I understand that she showed bravery and unprecedented skill while facing that criminal in the dust shop, but I still think we should have considered it more before accepting her so quickly. And this John boy as well. His transcripts say he is an excellent student, but the evidence we've witnessed so far has proven otherwise. I'm worried not only for his safety, but for Miss Nico's as well. Anything else? Glinda lowered her scroll and fixed her glasses before walking closer to the headmaster's side. I still cannot believe you decided to take those 2 young men out of the custody of the police and fly them here to Beacon. As far as we know, they could still be dangerous criminals and endanger the safety of the rest of our students. Osmond looked over his shoulder. This wouldn't be the first time we've taken young people with unfavorable pasts in our system. I know we might hold hesitations at first, but I always make sure that those I pick to attend are those I believe are worthy. Those 2 young men might appear bad on paper, but as we've witnessed in the test, they are very skilled and work well with others. They are genuinely concerned for their comrades and are not showing any signs that they are just using this chance to escape. I told you, I gave those boys the choice myself, and I know they deserve another chance to prove themselves. Believe in me, Glinda. I would not have taken this chance if I did not believe it was the right thing to do. Glinda was silent and looked off while holding back another complaint building inside her. Osmond noticed it. You have other reservations about something? Glinda sighed. Professor, I question whether it was a rational decision you made when you allowed a boy with history in his name to attend. Osmond looked back at her. I don't believe in judging someone just by what their name has garnered over time. I invited Miss Schnee not because of the prestige in her name, but the volume her skills spoke of. In the end, it is character we must see in a person, not their title. I know, sir, but I also know that you wish to open your doors to everyone that is willing to accept the task, human and fondness. But there are some people that can't look past the actions of the past and scars they've created. I just don't know if many people will be able to look past a name like his and accept the boy beneath the title. Osmond looked back over the forest and contemplated the possibility. He swirled his coffee in his mug. Well, I suppose only time will tell if we can truly move away from the past and build to a better future. I suppose, sir, we will just have to wait until they reach the temple before expecting anything else. Glinda searched through her scroll for a moment before something caught her attention. What did you use for relics this year, sir? Osmond did not answer. Sir, he continued to look out over the cliffs in silence. Might it be the reason that the chessboard was clear when I spotted it in your office this morning? Osmond just took a sip of his coffee and continued to wait for his students. Hunting. Yang pushed her way out of a few bushes, a frown on her face from fruitless exploration and multiple leaves and twigs sticking out of her lustrous hair. She ran her hand through her hair before she came out upon a steep hill that ran down into a lower clearing. She looked down before speaking over her shoulder. "Hey, come look at this." Following not long after was the black-haired beauty that she had made an acquaintance with last night. Blake stepped up to Yang's side. "What is it?" They both stood at the top of the hill, just over a large rock formation with several different pillars and pedestals at its ring base. The two girls stared at it for a moment before the blonde one questioned, "You think this is it?" "Well, considering it's the only man-made formation in the middle of a forest," Blake gave Yang an uninspired look, "I'd say it's a pretty good guess this is it." Blake started walking down the hill while Yang pouted. "Well, sure. Think of it like that, and it's obvious." The boxer followed after her bow-wearing partner as they made their way down to the abandoned temple. They stepped on the stone and started walking along the inside of the temple. They were separated as they looked at the objects of their exam, sitting on top of the pedestals and were black and gold figures. Blake raised an eyebrow. "The relics are chess pieces? Are they trying to be symbolic about something, or were they just lazy and grabbed the first thing they spotted?" "Meh, probably a little bit of both." Yang turned around with a smile. As a fellow procrastinator, I can relate about finding useful stuff at the last minute." Blake gave her a dry look before Yang looked over the pedestal again and noticed some were empty. "A few of the pieces are missing." "Well, there were a lot of other people taking this test," Blake mentioned before walking over to Yang. "It shouldn't be a surprise that other people got here first. I'm surprised more of them haven't made it yet." Yang mused before she shrugged her shoulders. "Screw it. They'll get here when they get here. Let's pick one." She looked over the golden pieces before the horse grabbed her attention, and she smiled. "Hey, how about this little horsey?" "That's a knight." "Why is the knight a horse?" Blake was silent for a moment before she shrugged in return. They smiled at their triumph at passing the test before they heard some rustling in the bushes away from them. Two girls shared a look before facing the noise and slowly inching towards the weapons. "You're right. There was something beyond the trees." A girl with her hair up in buns emerged from the bushes with a huff before looking up at the temple. She then noticed the two girls standing in the middle of the structure and deflated. "Aw, man. I thought we'd make it here first. Dang it." Yang and Blake looked between each other before the outgoing blonde smiled and waved her golden chess piece. "Sorry, but if it makes you feel any better, we just got here a moment ago." "Well, I guess that's better than nothing." Tenten looked behind her. "Sasuke, you were right. This was definitely the place we were supposed to go." Sasuke was walking out of the forest while dusting himself off. "That's a relief." "Sasuke, you made it." Yang waved at her new friend while bringing attention to her chess piece. "The relics are chess pieces. We got a horsey." "Knight. What she said." Sasuke and Tenten made it over to the temple with the raven-haired boy, looked over for the exceptional young girl in the red hood. He couldn't see her anywhere and looked at the curious blonde. "I guess you couldn't find Ruby in the end." "Nah, but she's strong. I'm sure she'll be alright. And maybe she teamed up with Naruto, so that'd be a plus." Yang smiled again and gestured to the black-clad girl beside her. "Anyway, I got someone else to tie me down. Sasuke, this is Blake. Say hi, Blake." Blake and Sasuke looked at each other for a moment, feeling the same sense of trepidation and anxiousness they felt when they walked past each other yesterday afternoon. Blake narrowed her eyes but still gave the raven-haired boy a slight nod before walking to look over the remaining chess pieces. Yang stood there in confusion as her partner walked off before waving the action off as another trait of the black-haired girl. "Oh, don't mind her. I'm pretty sure that's how she acts towards everyone she meets." Sasuke concealed some worry and nodded his head. "Yeah, you're probably right." "Sasuke!" The sword user turned around and caught a gold bishop piece tossed into his hand. He looked up to see Tenten grinning. "We passed!" Sasuke looked down at the piece in his hand before examining it and speaking out loud. "I guess this means not everyone has made it yet, doesn't it?" Yang showed some concern. "Yeah, I guess not." Blake reassured them. "They must have gotten lost on the way here. It's probably not the best idea to assume the worst just yet." Tenten walked over to them and smiled in agreement. "Yeah, I'm sure they're fine." "Hunting." "Why?" Slash. "Did you?" Swish. "Piss them off more." Naruto slashed through the head of a beowulf while shooting another in the back with an arrow. He turned his head. "They were following us. I tried to scare them off. I didn't know they'd get angrier. It's how a pack works. They look out for their own." Kiba punched one in the head before grabbing its leg and spinning around before throwing it into another group. And when one idiot kills one of their own, they get angry. Well, sorry, I didn't think about how they felt when they wanted to kill us. We wouldn't be in this situation if that super nose of yours could actually work. Shut up! Kiba defended himself. This forest is full of animals that mark the territory in Dead Grim. I can't get a clear trail on. No excuses. From now on, we're trusting my gut. Naruto argued before jumping back from a slash at his head and stood back to back with Kiba. The tattooed student looked around and gripped his stomach. Okay, and what does your gut say about this? Naruto looked around before stabbing Stormer by his feet. He reached back and pulled more of his short blades out as well as some wire. He gave a confident smirk. Decimate him. The Beowulfs all started to retreat and run away with a fruitful yip. Naruto watched as all the Grimm ran away from him with a confused and surprised look before he smiled. He gloated. Yeah, that's right. Don't mess with Naruto Uzumaki. Learn that and you might just live another day. Kiba tipped his shoulders. Not now, man. And another thing, Kiba grabbed his shoulders and shook him. What is it? Kiba had a horrified look on his face as he pointed forward. Naruto looked in the same direction as his eyes slowly started to widen in shock. A massive, hunched shadow started to descend over them, and a monstrous guttural growl reached their ears. Uh-oh. Hunting. Pyrrha stopped following John in the cramped cave space they currently found themselves in and looked behind her. Her instincts were flaring up for a moment and she wondered why. She looked back forward at her partner. Do you really think this is the place Professor Osmond told us to come to? John turned around while still illuminating the path in front of them with the torch in his hand. Well, this seems like just as good a place as any to hide a relic. Maybe some ancient weapon used in the war, or some food. I'm pretty hungry. Pyrrha continued to look around at the barely visible cave drawing lined along the rocks. She continued a few more feet before speaking up. John, we should probably go back outside. If we haven't found anything yet, then this might not be the right place. Pyrrha. And John looked back at her with a pained expression before motioning to the torch in his hand. I made a torch. A torch. This is like the most useful I've been in the whole test. Just let me enjoy it a little longer and we can... John stumbled and dropped the torch in a murky puddle, instantly extinguishing the flame. Everything was pitch black. Pyrrha, do you feel that? John, soul-crushing humiliation and regret? Yeah, been feeling that a lot lately. Pyrrha, no, not that. I feel something warm. A giant yellow glow brightened the pitch-black space, making the two students in training squint in their eyes. They looked forward and saw a strange oblong orb as the source of the light. John and Pyrrha stepped forward while examining the anomaly. Pyrrha tilted her head. What is it? Maybe the relic? It's pretty beautiful. I feel warm and happy. It's calming. John reached up to touch it, but the light flinched back at his touch. He smiled a little. Oh, I'm gonna catch you. I'm gonna get you. I gotcha. John jumped forward and grabbed his arms around the strange light source, but then he was slowly lifted off his feet and several feet into the air. John hung there, still attached to the light, before 8 beady, menacing red eyes opened in front of him. He shrunk. Good feelings gone. Hunting. The white-haired hare stood still for a moment while looking at the directions they could take. She started weighing her options. We should go this way. Ruby sighed from her spot on the ground. We already went that way. Right, I knew that. She stepped back to her original spot and looked around. Again, that way. Already did. Okay, give me a minute. Wise rubbed her temple and tried to figure out a way for them to find the site as quickly as possible. Ruby stood back up and dusted off her combat skirt. Wise, I think we're lost. We're not lost, we're just... I know we can find our way out of here if I can think for a moment. Ruby tried to reassure her partner. It's okay to admit it, Wise. Just let me help you and I bet we can work this out. I don't need your help, Wise argued while trying to concentrate on finding their way back. Lord knows it wasn't any help when you were just running around without a care in the world earlier. Ruby scrunched her face in annoyance. Look, I'm sorry that I didn't tell you what I was doing while fighting, but you can't keep holding that against me. It's not fair. Life isn't fair, and if you want to make it out of this, then you need to stop acting like a rowdy little child. Ruby fumed. Well, then you need to stop acting like a prissy bossy pants. How dare you? I am not a prissy bossy pants. You so are. I am not. Are too. Wise threw her hands up in the air in exasperation. You're such a brat. Why did you even come to this school? Ruby stood there for a moment and showed a slight hurt expression before shaking her head. She steeled her eyes. You know, I didn't ask to be brought here early. Do you know how scared I am coming to a school of my dreams and feeling like I'm not wanted? I'm terrified. I feel like I'm gonna throw up. But even if you hate me and we can't get along, I'm not gonna stop trying to be your partner because I promised myself no matter what happens, I'd become a huntress and pass beacon. Weiss looked at Ruby as the hooded girl walked over to a large tree and clapped her hands. "If you don't want to work with me, then that's fine. I'll figure a way out of here." She jumped on the base of the tree and started to shimmy her way up to the top. Weiss watched in surprise as the red-clad girl made her way up the tree. She looked around and tried to figure out what better way to find their destination before looking back at her determined partner. She sighed before running up the tree and started making her way up. "Hold up! Don't do this by yourself!" The two mismatched girls continued climbing up to the top of the tree. Weiss struggled. "Can you hold on for a moment? I'm not as fast at climbing trees as you." Ruby yelled down. "What? Haven't you ever climbed a tree before?" "No, as a matter of fact, I haven't." "Well, it's easy. Deep breath, one foot in front of the other. Oh, and don't look down. You'll fall if you look down." Weiss panicked and held herself even closer to the tree. The two students made their way to a more concentrated but bushier top of the tree. Ruby looked around in every direction to try and spot a difference. "I don't see anything." Weiss shook her head. "I'm having second thoughts about this." "Don't worry, you'll be fine." Ruby squinted her eyes. "Hey, there aren't so many trees over there. Let's try that spot." Weiss clung to the prickly pines even tighter. This was a bad idea. Why did we have to climb at the very top? We can see everything from up here, and the pine tree is easy to hold on to. But why is the top of this tree a pine tree? None of the other trees have anything else like this." Ruby thought for a moment. "Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. And the pines are black, and feathery, and warm." Ruby gulped for a moment before looking down. "Weiss, maybe we should climb down before anything." "Weiss!" Ruby looked down to see the white-haired Harris looking up at her with stark white horrified eyes. She slowly pointed up and Ruby followed her gaze. She looked up just in time to catch the gaze of two stilled, menacing red eyes along a white beak. The girls froze in fear as the giant nevermore they were clinging to started to unfurl its wings. The grim spread out to its full wingspan and started gathering a gust to lift itself. "Birdie, no!" End of chapter 4.